So I think it's about high time we get back into the swing of things in regards to the Montreal Canadiens and going over some of their young guys. I wanted to make a video about this player because he has been the subject of some very particular discourse on social media, particularly Twitter, over the past few weeks, and I do want to make another video sometime over the next few days going over the other Montreal Canadiens draft pick from earlier this year that garnered so much attention, so much controversy, and a lot of updates in regards to that player. You know, the Canadiens have had a very interesting track record the past few years where they draft guys that are super highly touted players, maybe a little bit too high, and then a few years down the line, everybody's saying, oh, it was a mistake to draft Kotkaniemi. Oh, it was a mistake to draft this other guy super high in the draft. And now we're talking today about Juraj Slafkovsky, the first overall pick back from the 2022 NHL Entry Draft, and just going over some really interesting and sort of serious comments made by Martin St. Louis, as well as Kent Hughes, coach and GM of the Montreal Canadiens, respectively. Before we go over that, though, I just wanted to go over the entire profile because I do feel like that is one of the more important things you need to acknowledge when going over Slafkovsky. Juraj this season has not had a great point production metric. He's at 7 points in 28 games played. He's on pace for roughly 21 points on the year, which, if you do the math, is around the same as what he got last season. But even though Juraj Slafkovsky has not necessarily been out there scoring crazy points or scoring the lights out, this is a player where if you watch his game, you'll see a much better, much smarter, and much more refined hockey talent than you would have seen if you watched his games last year. It's a night and day difference between how well Juraj Slafkovsky is playing and how well he's making decisions nowadays compared to when he played in his first year at 18 years old. Now, most Canadiens fans who actually watch the games will acknowledge this, but there still is the crowd that's going out there and saying, okay, but look at the numbers. Logan Cooley is so much better, and that guy was taken 3rd overall. Shane Wright is another prospect who has had better offensive output, and this and that and the other thing. Slafkovsky was the right pick, wrong pick, everybody's talking about it. There seems to be an even bigger portion of non-Canadiens fans that will go out there at every second they can to trash on Slafkovsky and talk about his point production as to why he's not really somebody that should have been drafted where he was. Now, I'm not going to speak about the future, but I will say that for right now, there has been some improvements. It's just those improvements have not shown up on the score sheet per se. And what Kent Hughes goes out there and talks about on the Eye Test podcast with Pierre Maguire and Boston Hockey Now's Jimmy Murphy is exactly where Slafkovsky has gone. Take a look at this video. It's going to be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read this. This is the latest episode of the Eye Test podcast with Pierre Maguire, with Jimmy Murphy, and with Kent Hughes. A whole bunch of guys that are lacking quite a bit of hair, I will say, just based off of the thumbnail. But to help us out as well, we're also going over onto an article published by Marco D'Amico on December 12th from Montreal Hockey Now, which cites the Kent Hughes interview on the podcast and transcribes it so it's easier for me to put it on the screen. I can read along, it's easy for you to follow, you know the protocol. So, let's go out there and talk about what it is that Kent Hughes has to say in regards to the development of Juraj Slafkovsky. Take a look at what the article writes. According to Hughes, the organization is more than satisfied with the progression in Slafkovsky's game, while also admitting that development isn't always linear. Hughes says this: "From the start of the year, we've seen an improvement in him from the prior season. We know it's not a straight line," said Hughes regarding Slafkovsky's growth this season. In fact, I remember sitting in Jeff Molson's office saying that I really liked where his game is going, and I think the following night was probably his worst game of the year. The article also goes over some of the things that Kent Hughes says into the smaller details, what particularly Slafkovsky has improved upon. "I think there's no question that they, the coaching staff, are seeing the progression in his game," said Hughes when asked about Slafkovsky's evolving this season. His strength along the walls, his ability to protect the puck. Last year, he'd get bumped and knock off balance. He'd lose the puck. He's learning to take his stick off the puck as he absorbs physical contact and repossess the puck afterwards. A few little tricks of the trade playing here in North America, especially at the NHL level. There's more to come. And you know what? That's a very good observation. That's one of the things that you don't really see too much of in the European game, mostly because the players are less physical over there than they are in the NHL. You could debate that just in general they're not as strong, and of course, the ice surface is bigger. So there's a lot less physical contact, rough shoving, etc., along the boards for battles or on the rush too. Slafkovsky getting hit a bunch with his head down, that was a pretty big pattern last year. And he has sort of found a way to avoid that more so this year. Now, in regards to that sort of physical game, this is also what Kent Hughes goes out there and says. You can tell that he doesn't have his full confidence yet playing around the net, especially with Suzuki and Caulfield. He's looking to move the puck all the time. I think that's all part of him figuring things out step by step, said Hughes regarding the next phase of Slafkovsky's development. We're trying to be very mindful about not popping off 20 things on his to-do list in terms of needs for improvement, because we all know that hockey is such an instinctive and reactive game, and we don't want to take that away from him. I think last year we probably did, and I think that was bound to happen one way or another. But as we move forward here, let's tackle the things and then move on to the next. He finishes off this interview by saying, I still think it's going to be another 3 or 4 years before we can see what Slafkovsky can be. Tell that to all the social media Twitter trolls that are going out there and talking about Logan Cooley's production this year, Kent Hughes. But either way, there is a pretty good sentiment here. We all kind of recognize that Slafkovsky was never going to be the best prospect out of the draft 1 or 2 years removed from the draft itself. This was a project through and through. This was a different kind of hockey player, and one whose overall profile is so unique that it's tough to find a full-on comparable. And while things were going a lot rougher for him earlier in his career, it's good to know that Kent Hughes and Martin St. Louis have a lot of faith in what it is they're trying to build here. In fact, this is a post made on Twitter by Habs on Reddit. It's citing an article on CBC Sports. According to Alexandre Gascon, the Habs management were actually ready to send Slafkovsky down to the AHL, but it was coach Martin St. Louis who insisted that Slafkovsky stays in the NHL to be further coached by him. Uri's game has taken big steps since then. The article in which this quote is from is a piece on, as we had said, Radio Canada, CBC, Juraj Slafkovsky, and the personal mission of Martin St. Louis. And the quote reads this: when everything seemed to be going against Slafkovsky, when even the other coaches allowed themselves thinly veiled criticism, Martin St. Louis insisted. The young man was on the verge of coming out of his shell, and he asked the Habs to continue the development of the Slovak in the NHL. So, not only is it Kent Hughes going out there and talking about the progression, the intricate details, what he does better now versus what he did last year, it's Martin St. Louis himself coming out here and saying, hey, I get it, you guys want to send him down, he was going through this slump, but I want him to stay here. I want to give him consistent instructions, and I want to be the guy to help him break out of this slump. And this is an idea that we had talked about before, but it actually does have its productivity behind it, like when you really explain what's going on here. Like, okay, Slafkovsky has a specific plan, he's got a specific sort of regiment that he's got to follow, instructions from the coaching staff. What's going to happen if he gets sent down to the AHL? All of a sudden, the coaching staff that's talking to him is different. They're probably going to have different instructions, different things to focus on, different mindsets to instill within him, and that could really change the way the Canadiens want him developed, especially when you consider that Martin St. Louis has been sort of molding Slafkovsky to become this kind of player, only for him to go to potentially the AHL and have all that progress get tossed out the window because the coaching staff down there in Laval would want him to focus on other things. So Slafkovsky staying up in the NHL to be given consistent instructions throughout the entirety of the year at Martin St. Louis' own personal suggestion makes a lot of sense. And it's very apparent that the rest of the Canadiens' executive staff is high on Slafkovsky still. I do like that Kent Hughes goes out there and puts a timeline on it, like, okay, 3-4 years. We'll give it until 2028, 2029, and then we'll see what Slafkovsky could be. Because by that time, I mean, the guy's going to be 22, 23 years old, 24 maybe even, and we could be viewing the aftermath of years of getting molded and learning NHL habits and having this guidance under Martin St. Louis. But my question ultimately to you is, do you buy it? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this entire Juraj Slafkovsky conversation. Articles will be linked to the podcast with Kent Hughes, the article with the Kent Hughes quotes, as well as the article with the Martin St. Louis comments on it from Radio Canada CBC. What are your thoughts on Slafkovsky's development? Let me know in the comment section what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.